Country yesterday, there were rallies in the wake of last week's verdict. Joining me around this table for a look at the issues that has raised passions from both sides, Newt Gingrich. He is CNN Crossfire host. Crystal Wright, editor and publisher of conservativeblackchick.com. We should also mention that she was a delegate for Newt Gingrich last year when he ran for president. Sherilyn Ifill, president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and Charles Blow, a CNN political commentator and opinion writer for the New York Times. We're sort of out of time with all your titles, but let me start with a basic question. It seems to me that the president was lowering expectations a little bit there in that part of the speech, saying, you know, this is basically, has to be at the state and local level to change the laws. People on the street saying justice for Trayvon. What does justice for Trayvon Martin look like?
Well, let me just say what I've been struck with over the last week, and I watched Charles on a couple shows and other conversations about this. There are two things going on. There's actually a case involving a specific set of facts. And there's a national explosion as people suddenly look up and are reminded that 4.5 years into this presidency, there are very deep, painful problems that not only have not even been addressed, they're not even discussed. And so I think you have a psychological thing going on, which is in the streets, and you have a legal case. And the president's partly saying there is, and I think he's hinting, there is no legal ground for the Justice Department to reopen this case. But the country needs to have some kind of conversation about how big the gap is between the black community and the rest of the country.
And I would argue with the speaker that not only are the dots not being connected in the streets, people that are protesting now, justice for Trayvon meant a guilty verdict for George Zimmerman. And the separate dialogue that none of us are talking about, and the president alluded to, is the huge poverty that has been dragging down black Americans for over 50 years, and that is a direct result of the breakdown of the black family. It's not like it's just happening out of nowhere. And that, I think, is part of the frustration we're not having an honest dialogue about.
So as the lawyer on the panel, let me say, first of all, I don't think the president was saying that there's no hope at the federal level. I think he was managing expectations, and I think that's important for him to do. He was essentially saying there's going to be an investigation, but there's no guarantee that you can bring a federal hate crimes action against George Zimmerman. I actually think the communities have been connecting the dots. I don't know that everybody's been listening. But people have been talking about poverty, the huge unemployment rate, especially for young African-American men, in some cities reaching 50%, and what that means. And you hear it bubble up from time to time, sometimes at presidential press conferences. When people say justice for Trayvon, and this I have to say I think the speaker is right, they're talking about the case. And ensuring that we do everything we can to ensure that someone is held and that George Zimmerman is held accountable for what happened to this young teenager. But we're also talking about the larger issue, and that's what the president spoke to, the larger issue of the way in which racial profiling across gender, across economic class affects African Americans. It is the touchstone. It is the one thing that strikes to our very dignity. And that's what the president spoke to. Part of it is about law, but part of it is about something much broader.
I think all of that's right. I think, there is the individual case, but I think people are worried deeply about the precedents that are set if a person is allowed to walk away from killing someone and have no culpability in that whatsoever. And that, I think that walking away speaks to the structural biases that exist within the system and exist within the laws, and people don't want those structural biases to have kind of get away scot-free.
Let me, and I will let you make this point, Mr. Newt, in just a second, but I want to bring in somebody else. I want to show you something first that happened last year on the House floor when one congressman broke official decorum and put on a hoodie after Trayvon Martin was killed, but before George Zimmerman was charged in his death.
Racial profiling has to stop, Mr. Speaker. Just because someone wears a hoodie does not make them a hoodlum.
Joining me from Chicago is Illinois Congressman Bobby Rush, who was there on the House floor, as you just saw. Congressman, I heard a couple of things here. I know that you are having an urban violence seminar meeting coming up. You represent one of the most certainly violent districts in Illinois. You've had a lot of problems with poverty, etc. When you look at not the trial itself, but the aftermath, as Newt Gingrich was talking about, where do you see the base of this problem?
Well, it certainly lies in every community of which there is a significant black population in every state, every city, every municipality in America. There's not 1 inch of America that does not have this problem where there are minorities and where there are whites who are citizens. It's here in Chicago. 2 years before Trayvon Martin, here in Chicago, we had a young homeless man who was accused of stealing a case of small container of toothpaste. And they said he ran out of the store. He was chased by a security guard down the street. 4 or 5 people held him down, and the security guard strangled him to death. And when I wrote and protested to the Cook County State's Attorney, she said that she was not going to bow down to political charges and charge this assailant with murder. So he's walking the street. Anthony Kaiser preceded Trayvon Martin. And so it's all over the America. And
has there been no improvement, Congressman? In the years, you have fought this battle for a very long time. And I think sometimes people feel like, you know, the fact that there is an African-American president says an awful lot about this country and prejudice. And you're sounding...
At certain levels it does, okay? At certain levels it does. Young people, and I wore that hoodie on the Congress floor, down in the well of the Congress. I wore that to connect with the young people, to encourage them. Because if it had not been for the courageous acts of young people going to the streets, then Trayvon Martin would have been just like Anthony Kaiser. No one would have known that he was murdered.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that was my purpose. There has been some progress. I won't say that it has not. But any time during this trial, I think probably the most vivid vivid picture that I can't get out of my head was the defense attorney and his daughters licking the ice cream. It certainly reminded me of pictures that I had seen years ago of lynch mobs standing around, a black man hanging on a tree,
right.
And they were in all kinds of expressions of euphoria.
Congressman, let me...
They kind of brought those things back.
Yeah, let me ask you to hold on a second. I want to get some reaction from our panel. You were earlier. I cut you off, so I want to give you the chance to go ahead.
This fits perfectly what I was going to say earlier. You have a congressman, and I respect Bobby Rush. You have a congressman who represents the most violent city in America. You have a congressman who represents a city in which over 500 people were killed last year, 74% of them African American. You have a congressman who represents a city which is 80% of the killings, according to the police, are by gangs. Gangs have increased, well, let me just finish. Gangs have increased by 40% since this president was elected. There is no federal program to stop it. No one wants to have an honest conversation about it. And so you have a congressman whose own district is bleeding, who puts on a hoodie as a symbolic act, but he doesn't do anything about the gangs in his own district.
And wait a minute.
Hang on, and let me just go. First of all, Congressman, let me let you...
That's a charge. Yeah, that's a charge, Newt, that is not going to hold, doesn't hold water. I have been working relentlessly since I've been in Congress, even when you were a Speaker of the Congress, of the House, and did not want to hear these matters. I have been working on trying to deal with this violence. I'm astounded and ashamed about this violence. But this is also systemic to an overall problem. Chicago will take care of this violence. That's one of the reasons why on Friday, the 26th, we're having this national summit on urban violence. This was before the verdict. We had planned this. The Congressional Black Caucus